Our first reading is from Proverbs chapter 25. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great. For it is better to be told, "Come up here," than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. Our psalm will be read responsively at Psalm 112. Hallelujah! Happy are they who fear the Lord and have a great delight in God's commandments.
Their descendants will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed.
Wealth and riches will be in their house, and their righteousness will last forever.
Light shines in the darkness for the upright. The righteous are merciful and full of compassion.
It is good for them to be generous in lending and to manage their affairs with justice.
For they will never be shaken. The righteous will be kept in everlasting remembrance.
They will not be afraid of any evil rumors. Their heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord.
Their heart is established and will not shrink until they see their desire upon their enemies.
They have given freely to the poor, and their righteousness stands fast forever. They will hold up their head with honor.
The wicked will see it and be angry. They will gnash their teeth and pine away. The desires of the wicked will perish.
Our second reading is from Hebrews chapter 13. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as if you were in prison with them, those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." So we can say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me?" Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of this way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 14th chapter. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
It's always been like this. At the dinner table, I had a place to sit. But what if we had company? Did I have to sit at the kids' table? Or at someone else's house? What spot should I take? Whenever I go out to eat, and particularly when I'm with a large group, I'm always looking for the right place, where it doesn't seem like I'll displace anyone and that everyone's conversations can take place as they wish. During the last about decade, the question is, who wants to get stuck sitting next to the pastor? In the over a third of my life that I've spent showing up to meals with Pastor Michael, I'm always scanning to see where his left-handedness can sit so that he's on the end or at least elbowing me and not somebody else. That's the issue in this morning's gospel lesson, not the elbowing part, the choosing a seat part. Jesus is speaking to people who are concerned about finding the right seat. He's observing guests at a dinner party, and one of the behaviors he observes is how guests try to figure out what the best seats are, and then making sure that they get them. Everybody is trying to figure out who is the greatest and who is the least by figuring out where they are sitting at the dinner party. Jesus is watching the seat selecting, and the Pharisees, who are the hosts of the party, are watching Jesus watch the seat selecting. You might have heard before that Jesus sometimes selected seats to eat and drink with sinners, and the Pharisees hated that. In their minds, they understood that in life, you are who you eat with. If you're righteous, you eat with righteous people. If you're a sinner, you eat with other sinners. If you're a righteous person who eats with sinners, then you're going to be grouped with the sinners too. Likewise, if you sit next to someone more honorable, then you're going to be considered more honorable too. And if you sit next to somebody at the low end of the table, that says something about you too. The Pharisees know that you are who you eat with. And it gives a better understanding of Jesus' storytelling to the guests at the party. First, he says kind of a simple phrase, some simple phrases that mean along the lines of, have a realistic idea of who you are, look in the mirror and know, say, hey, maybe I'm not that close to the host. I guess maybe I'm not that great. But then he goes on to say, take the lowest, most humble seat. Sit the farthest away that you can, even if it means that everyone is looking at you and wondering about you, and you know that they will be, because they see that you are who you eat with. Jesus' words of advice to the guests are somewhat risky to take, but he has even more radical words for the hosts. He tells the hosts at the dinner party not to invite those who are similar to them. Jesus says instead, go out and invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. The understanding here is that they can't help you. They can't pay you back. They can't turn around and give you a party. A host who invites the poor, the blind, and the lame is a truly generous host, not expecting anything in return. It doesn't end there, though. It's radical because you are who you eat with. Now, in the 1980s, a movie called Places in the Heart, which I did not watch in the 1980s, in case you're wondering, featured Sally Field as a young widow struggling to keep her farm during the Depression. At the beginning, her husband, who serves as the town sheriff, goes out to help a young black man who is drunk. Her husband is accidentally shot and killed. In the next scene, the young black man is hanged by the townspeople. The widow then takes on a blind man as a boarder to help with expenses, and a black man to help with her farm. The town is against her plan to try to run her farm and encourages her to sell. But she is determined to make her farm successful, keep her family together, and to live beyond people's judgmental ways. Near the end of the movie, the black man who had been helping on the farm is run out of town. The final scene of the movie is a very powerful and touching one that takes place in a local church. It's a communion service, and as is common in the Reformed tradition, everyone remains seated, and the bread and the wine are passed down the pew from one person serving the next. At first, it seems like an ordinary scene until the young widow takes the bread and passes it to the person next to her, her husband. He, in turn, passes the bread to the next person, the young man who shot him. Later on, we see the man who had been run out of town, the people who had run him out, the blind boarder, all eating and drinking together. The scene portrays a sharing of communion among characters, both loved and feared, both living and dead, because Jesus invited them. This scene is clear about who should be invited. All people of all walks of life who are the very fabric of God's being. It's the communion of saints. You are who you eat with. Here we gather around this communion table, rich and poor, young and old, men and women, wounded and healing. We gather around this table and eat and drink with one another and Jesus. The holiest of the holy, he took the lowest place right next to us, and now he invites us to eat and drink with him, even though we can never pay him back. Your worldly position doesn't really matter, Jesus says. At God's table, things are different. Expectations, well-established traditions, previously acceptable hierarchies, Jesus overturns them all. And then he invites us to go and to sit next to eat with, to know and to serve a list of his present day outside and marginalized people, of the poor and the lame and the sinners. A list with similar and dissimilar groupings that we could create for our present day margins. He invites us to these people as if we are who we eat with, because we are. We are all the communion of saints, gifted a seat even our most thoroughly thought through selection couldn't find. Amen.